Loyal 4 for 4 and Move the Line fans will recognize today's guest. We are joined by our very own John Daigle to unpack his recent mock draft up on the site. We're also going to try to comb through all the recent news and movement at the top of the draft here on this week's Move the Line. Hello and welcome to Move the Line, joined by a familiar cast of faces, our standard Move the Line crew and our standard draft crew, kind of merging into one. Joined here as always by Connor Allen, Scott Smith for draft season, and obviously our friend who joins us all the time in season. It is John Daigle. I'll start with you, Daigle. How are we doing, bud?
Doing well. Mid-70s here in Chicago, which always makes everyone happier, especially when it's the off-season. You have more time to go outside and touch grass. So doing really well. This NFL draft, as we'll talk about at the top of the show, is a wild one. Fewest bets in our tracker that I've seen to bet. I haven't even laid a single bet, even though I have a couple behind the scenes that I'm betting myself, but don't want to give to anyone because I don't want to put them in an odd position, since all of it right now is just jargon. Like, we are dealing with news from either side on every player right now. We are getting the least amount of help that I can recall in the last decade from national reporters that matter, like Peter Schrager, Daniel Jeremiah, Todd McShay. McShay, even for the great work he's doing, has gone every direction on Bryce Young, for instance, saying not only is he the best player, he also won't go number one, but he will go number one. I've seen every single angle. So there's just a lot to talk about and decipher here.
A lot to unpack. I feel like the more we know, the less we know. It is, we're getting close, though. We're approaching 2 weeks at this point. Recording here on a Wednesday afternoon. We are 2 weeks away from draft eve. And, be interested to see what you guys have parsed through in the last week since we last met. Connor, how are we doing?
Good. Yeah, as Daigle mentioned, super nice out. Was at Wrigley last night for the Cubs game. It was awesome. But summertime shy is here. One of the few times in Chicago that you're proud to be part of this city, where because people come out, they party. It's always a good time. So, NFL draft, though, thankfully, coming up here in 2 weeks. We need more markets and we need more information, as you guys mentioned. It is getting thin when we only have over-unders posted at one sports book. I don't blame DK at all, honestly. I think FanDuel, can be, all of them just dropping the ball hardcore right now.
Yeah, this time last year we had a pretty extensive menu over at like PointsBet or FanDuel. That just is. We've been begging for more markets, but at the same time, even the markets that we're limited to, we're not getting consistent information out of those spots too. One of the guys, obviously in the space, who's been fantastic at it for a very long time, has been with us. If you have not been listening to the draft pods to this point, you can go back. Kind of get a feel for where we're at. Been plugging along successfully with mock drafts for years and is really keeping his finger on team visits and all that type of stuff going on. Obviously, Scott Smith. Scott, how are we doing today, bud?
Good, man. Dealing with pollen season that comes along with draft season down here in Louisiana. So just grinding through a lot of these visits and trying to comb through some of my connections so we can sort out some of this Bryce Young, CJ Stroud nonsense that's going on.
Yeah, tea times are being made here in Chicago. Good things are happening. We're excited about where we are in terms of the calendar and where we're moving. So I want to remind folks, again, if you are watching on YouTube, we appreciate that. Like the video, subscribe, all those great things here on the 4 for 4 Bets YouTube page. We also have a 4 for 4 Football YouTube page as well, where obviously you get all of the standard fantasy stuff along those lines. If you're into that audio podcast, wherever you're listening, rate, review, all those things. We really appreciate it. We also have a way to get access to all of our bets here at 4 for 4. You want to get a taste of it, you can get it for really, really cheap. You can get over to 4for4.com/plans and get a betting subscription, access to everything on the site. You want to get a taste? We partnered with No House Advantage, $5 deposit at No House Advantage. It is a pick'em site. You go into the App Store, download the app, use promo code 4for4bets. Again, minimum deposit of $5, basically a $150 value to get a 3-month betting subscription. You get all of our draft bets, all the content on the site. Daigle's doing all sorts of best ball stuff and getting you ready for your season-long drafts. We're previewing team by team, getting you ready for all that stuff. Everything on 4 for just $5 with No House Advantage. Daigle, I'll kick it to you because we really don't have any thoughts in terms of what you're thinking before we jump into your mock draft. Producer Sal, we could pop that up there too if you want to throw it up. A lot of news, right? We felt pretty sure that we knew it was Stroud and Young going at the top. It's kind of how you have it here in your first mock on the site. Again, you can get that for free by going over to 4for4.com and follow along. What do you make of all the news in the last week? We've seen a shift in the marketplace since we've last met with the Bryce Young steam moving. And that's kind of, I think, maybe what's going to be your argument. It's kind of been mine. These are, to Connor's point, we've such limited markets out there. It's like a match in the fire, one video, one report, and really the line starts to move. And I think you just get steam chasing more so than any concrete information. What do you make of the 1-2 market with Stroud and Young right now?
As I've been yelling in our Slack the last month, we should only be playing the long game here, understanding that we were always going to get a better number on CJ Stroud, since at this time, I still think the odds are driven solely by clickbait. Daniel Jeremiah, Todd McShay, as I mentioned earlier, are putting out these mocks. But even then, when you read the descriptions, they say, for instance, that they want to try something. Like Lance Zierlin's most recent mock, he literally said, I'm just trying to fit this player here since I fit Y here in my last mock, which doesn't give any reason to any analysis. It's just saying, I'm just seeing what this looks like publicly. And thus, lines are then moving based on absolutely nothing. And so we've seen, as you mentioned, the last couple weeks now, Young, yes, has been steamed to minus 250, minus 300 a few books, and he did visit with the Panthers personally. We are getting CJ Stroud's visit next week, so I wonder how much that line crashes yet again. But if you are betting Stroud, and I still am somewhat confident, 60-40, 70-30 at CJ Stroud, now is obviously the time to do it. Like, this is when we bet, not when it's minus money. When we are getting plus money is when you're hammering this line right now. I still believe, and I could be wrong, this is not even a hard stance. Like I said, I'm very open to Young going number 1 overall, but I still believe this is strictly a smokescreen. I still think the Panthers are dangling this carrot because they know they have their player locked in Stroud, and they know the Texans, as stubborn as Nick Caserio is, because he comes from the same stubborn Patriots cronies line that does the same thing every single time they go to another organization. They get locked on their one player. And it's very clear the Texans want Bryce Young due to their ties to Alabama and Nick Saban, since that's who is tied to the Patriots. Thus, if the Panthers know that the Texans only want Bryce Young, it only makes sense. They're only doing their due diligence to put it out there that they are then interested in Bryce Young 3 weeks out from the draft. That's where I stand right now. Again, it could move, but 1 and 2, I still think is Stroud and Young.
Connor, Daigle laid out a 70-30, 60-40-ish number there in terms of confidence there. We played, Stroud number that we thought was moving and getting away from us. Obviously we're on the wrong side of that now, but to Daigle's point, if you are still confident, you're not a bad time to jump in on Stroud. Or do you suggest holding, or really what's your confidence level in terms of if you were to put a number on the Stroud Young thing? Because the dynamic here that's interesting is, which I believe you talked about it recently, it doesn't seem like Stroud is the guy for the Texans. And that's probably why there's some posturing here. It brings in a whole nother element that, who goes number 2 and the chain of events that follows is kind of why it's really, really hard and difficult to kind of parse through right now. But where would you put your confidence level in Stroud Young?
Yeah, I probably still go 60-40 Stroud Young at this point. But I think, so based on what we know since last week, because obviously with the Young steam, I was freaking out a little bit. Scott was freaking out a little bit, reaching out to as many people as we can. From my understanding, there's like a split within the organization, right? So it's like some people, the coaching staff particularly, want Stroud, others want Young. Now, I think that the coaching staff probably likes Young, and I think that the ownership and whoever's on Stroud or on Young likes Stroud. But how that shakes out, I think we don't really know yet. And it seems like after this visit, like the final decision will be made. And I think that part of the reason that we, played that early number was because, at least I kind of adhered to the theory that you probably traded up knowing who you were going to get. And I think that's still actually possibly true. And it's something like what Daigle said, is that the timing has been very peculiar about the Panthers saying, oh, okay, yeah, we want Bryce Young. And then the Texans now responding and saying, well, we don't even need a quarterback. We don't like CJ Stroud. We don't even need a quarterback. We'll take whoever, like a 2. And so it's kind of like, I think the tug and pull, of this 1 and 2 situation is, I think that Scott Fitterer and the Panthers are really hoping to squeeze the Texans for another draft pick, get them to trade up, and then still get either one of their guys, because I think that they legitimately like both. Now, that has not been the Texans' response at all. It has been the opposite. It's been, oh, we'll take, Will Anderson, we'll take Tyree Wilson, all those things here. But my issue though with this Texans thing, and something that I just do not buy at all, is that they're not going to take a quarterback at 2. And you guys can lay it out here, but if you look at this Texans team, they're not, like, if they pick at 2 and 12 and pick 2 more players, they're not bad enough like to be in this conversation again automatically. And at the same time, like Lance Zierlein had in his mock them trading up to pick Will Levis. That is just the most ridiculous scenario ever and the biggest gamble. Like quarterback going 3, 4, 5 is so likely, I think, or like 4 quarterbacks going in the top 5, 6 picks that like, sure, could Will Levis be there at 7 or 8 or 9? Maybe. I mean, but you're really telling me that you're willing to risk running another year of Davis Mills and Case Keenum at this point back, like with this team? I mean, to me, it makes no sense. I get that they think they have some stability with signing D'Amico Ryans to a longer contract, but I mean, I just don't know how you can sell that to your fan base to say, yeah, we were rotating Davis Mills and Jeff Driscoll as our red zone quarterback last year, and now we're coming in, we're going to run it back, but we're getting better. Don't worry, we're getting better. Like, just makes no sense to me. So I'm out on that. I think they're going to pick, if it goes young one, I think they'll pick Levis or Stroud.
And that was maybe what I was taking away from that, Scott, is even if we kind of laughed at the Zierlein mock draft, but maybe the nugget in there was the interest in Levis, right? Because the Zierlein connection, he's had some success in landing with the Texans draft pick. He was on, Derek Stingley Jr. last year before really anyone else was nationally. And that might be the breadcrumb to take away from that when you want to tie in the concerns about the Texans not being on CJ Stroud. The connections with, Lombardi coming out recently saying, I think that CJ Stroud, I'm hearing that he's difficult to coach. We know Lombardi was a part of the Belichick circle for a little bit. He's probably got ties to, Nick Caserio, and that's probably not a difficult thing to kind of tie together. And then you get into maybe there's some Will Levis love. And again, the dynamic there where, we both are marking Levis to go to 11. Daigle's got him there as well. And there's a real shot that Levis is in play at number 2, which just kind of speaks to the volatility of where we're at. So, what do you make of kind of what we've seen here at the top of late?
It's just hard for me to see Will Levis there at number 2. I think when you start looking at all the scouts and the guys that evaluate prospects, and there's a big gap between CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, and then where you find Will Levis and Anthony Richardson to a lot of people. And some people even have Hendon Hooker as the 3rd quarterback. So it's hard for me to see Houston taking Levis over Stroud. I tend to think the whole agent issue with the Deshaun Watson incident that went down with Houston is a little bit overblown. I don't see somebody holding such a grudge that they're not going to make the best move for their football team, if CJ Stroud is that guy. It's a situation. I've been scouring through as much information as I can between both Carolina and Houston. And, it's up in the air for right now, but I tend to go and lean in the position that I don't see them passing up on a quarterback. However, with that being said, you just had Ryan Leaf on Good Morning Football today talking about the quarterbacks that are going to be in next year's draft, saying that all 3 would possibly be drafted before the top 2 here. So there is an outside scenario, and I've started playing around with the scenarios a little bit to see, let's just say Bryce Young does go 1 and Houston does pass on quarterback. I don't think it makes sense considering they only gave Case Keenum a $4 million contract to be the backup / 1B for if they do roll out there. But I don't see a reason for them to have 3 quarterbacks on their roster. I think there is an outside spot. And if that was, Bryce Young to go number 1, the 2 teams that we're talking about that need quarterbacks in Indianapolis and possibly Tennessee are both in the same division as Houston. So would that even be an option for those teams to move up to 2 if Stroud was available at 2? So those are just some of the things that I'm looking at right now, trying to piece together to figure out what makes sense.
For the Lance Zierlein mock, yes, it was laughable, but I also think another takeaway to your point, Noonan, was that more importantly than nailing Derek Stingley over Sauce Gardner, he nailed Texas A&M's Kenyon Green over Zion Johnson. No one else had that, and he put those 2 together. So I opened Zierlein's mock. I read the first 2 picks and was like, okay, this is wrong. I see what he's doing. But more importantly, let me just look at the Texans and then close this out because I'm going to learn nothing else from it. And so the fact that he even said for the Texans, at least, as you mentioned, that they are looking at quarterback elsewhere, if it's Stroud at number 2. I completely believe that. I've been on that for the past month now. It's been my thought that they're so locked into one quarterback that maybe they don't want it. Connor, you mentioned trying to sell to the fan base. I don't think they've been trying to sell to the fan base anyways. I don't think they give a shit. They're just making money at the top of the front office. So I think you're engineering it backwards, and that you're asking, what do they do? It's like what people are doing with the Colts right now. They're asking, what are they going to do at quarterback if they don't pick at number 4? I don't know, but you're asking the wrong question. Ask what they're going to do at number 4, not working it from the other way around, because I don't think they know what they're going to do just yet. And so I actually as well think the Texans don't go quarterback at number 2 if Young is not there. I think it could be Jackson Smith-Njigba as the first receiver, since I think they're locked on him in the mid-first. I really think they could just take him at number 2 and say, well, worry about trading up for a quarterback like Levis if the time comes at 12 or if he falls to us. I think there are a number of ways they could go, honestly. So that's where I'm at right now. And then for Levis, this is always my issue, not only with playing for fantasy like Devy leagues, getting into dynasty, because Devy leagues create biases. Getting in the weeds and this stuff 2 months into the draft creates biases. And right now you see people who have Will Levis tickets, like a number 1 overall. They're just hammering dumb bets, like number 2, number 3, number 4, because they're in deep and they've created this bias and can't get out of their own thoughts. So that's why I also do not like getting in. I even mentioned in my mock with the Cardinals, with the Eagles, with the Saints, with the Packers, that, hey, I will back off this player for sure if we get some news. But right now we don't have news, so I'm just assuming they're going to take this player instead. So yeah, the Will Levis thing, right now it seems like number 2 is being driven more by the people who are in too deep and can't get out of their own way more than anything.
So I want to push back on the Lance Zierlein stuff here. So Lance Zierlein's last mock was obviously very correct, and in the Texan stuff. All of his other mocks had other guys leading up to his other one. They were completely wrong. And on Twitter yesterday, I was reading through his replies. He said, I have no inside information on this. I am just putting together tea leaves. And this is based off of a scenario that is now being pushed by the entire national media, that they're going to pass on a quarterback or 2, and that maybe they don't like CJ Stroud. We've heard that in other places. I mean, but most of this has been from Zierlein. And he literally said on Twitter yesterday, he's like, it was in a reply. So, I had to dig for it, but, getting my hands a little dirty here. He said, I do not have inside information on this, which to me, like, that means, okay, well, I believe that Lance Zierlein will have the answer, but I don't think that right now, like, he's like, yeah, this is it, guys. Like, this is for sure it, like, I think he's just going off of what he's hearing, going off of like some rumors here and there, but it doesn't seem to be like something that he's locked into. So, yeah, I mean, like, could they not take a quarterback? Sure. Because I mean, again, it's whatever, not assumption of rational coaching. Yeah. Like, they can do whatever, but I think saying because Zierlein said it is like a fallacy at this point, because I just don't think he knows.
And to that point, I guess I am leaning into it more because it confirmed my bias, where I also, before I even read that mock, have been assuming they are not interested in quarterback at number 2 if Young is not there. So maybe I am leaning into it too heavily because it confirmed my priors.
The interesting part, as Connor brought up, the ability to pass on a quarterback in this draft and think that things are going to fall so perfectly that you're going to be in position to draft at the top of the board again next year. They went 3-2-1 in the division last year with the quarterback situation that they had. And the rest of the division, again, like the Jaguars have kind of ascended. They're not flawless. And, and I know we have questions about the Colts, definitely questions about the Titans. Like, you really can't mess around. It's not like they're going to be passing on a quarterback and comfortably the worst team in that division. So it just gets really delicate to sell to a tank job for 17 games to ensure that you're in position to draft Caleb Williams or, anyone else that you have your eye on there at the top of the board. So just kind of a very, very, very delicate thing. The thing here that we're still waiting on, that everyone talks about, and again, we've heard it from Daniel Jeremiah recently, the betting market will tell you very clearly that they expect it to happen too, based on, in my opinion, Will Anderson's over-under number at 3.5 and how it's juiced to the over. No one expects the Cardinals to stay at 3 and make the pick. Daigle here put Christian Gonzalez to go to the Cardinals, which I think makes a ton of sense. Interested here, Daigle, to get your thoughts on if you assume that is we'll stay home and make this pick, or are you kind of just saying, this is who I think they're going to land. I just don't know where they're going to land it based off of who trades up for 3.
And the first sentence I write in my mock on the site is, I expect this pick to be traded. So right now I am just filling in the players, assuming that's where they fall. Having said that, I think trades and mocks are for betas, so I don't put trades in any of my mocks. I never have, never will. But right now, for the Cardinals, understanding that it's a defensive-minded head coach in Jonathan Gannon, understanding that Monty Ossenfort, as I mentioned even in the article, comes from Patriots ties, which overvalue secondary pieces, even though, again, as I mentioned in the piece on 4for4.com, that as the Patriots scout across their scouting department from 2006 to 2019, the Patriots only drafted with Ossenfort one cornerback, first-round cornerback, and it was Devin McCourty. He happened to be a Hall of Famer. So they at least got that right, but never dabbled too high. But we've seen from Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia, the list goes on and on of Patriots cronies. They tend to take that and overvaluing secondary to the next step whenever they branch off from New England. So I do think we're getting a defensive player here for sure at number 3 if the Cardinals stay put. I don't know if this trade with the Cardinals happens before the draft on draft night. I don't know if they don't get enough value from what they want and just decide to stay put. But yeah, if they do stay put, it's 100% defense in my opinion.
Very interesting. Yeah. And then, in this instance, you have them with a cornerback and, good price still out there on Christian Gonzalez to be, first defensive player. I think the betting market is still telling you that Will Anderson is the play. And you have Will Anderson going next to the Colts, which I think is a very, very interesting spot here. Would love to get your thoughts on the Colts taking Anderson and basically not addressing the quarterback in a spot where everyone feels like not only does Chris Ballard need to draft a quarterback, he needs to hit a home run at the quarterback position to solidify his job and to maintain things there. But, speak on the Will Anderson thing.
And if they are in on CJ Stroud, I haven't seen anything. And if Young were to go 1 and Stroud were to suddenly fall to number 4, then yeah, sure, maybe the Colts take a quarterback here. And this is not a hard stance. I will absolutely come off the stance if we get news, but I don't think we've received any news on the Colts being interested in a quarterback outside of Irsay drunkenly mentioning that, quote, that Alabama kid, unquote, at his post-combine pressers. Other than that, I think everyone's just trying to make a logical choice when a logical choice is not the Colts' MO. And more importantly, in understanding the pieces that they need on this defense with Yannick Ngakoue most likely not re-signing there. So edge makes a ton of sense. Understanding that quarterback and just trading Stephon Gilmore to the Cowboys, they need a number 1 corner since everyone else on their roster is absolute garbage. So a cornerback in either Gonzalez or Devin Witherspoon makes a lot of sense as well. And I kind of pieced together which one has a lean there in my article. But also, this is not a regime change. I think that's what's making everyone pick quarterback, besides the fact that, yes, the Colts need a quarterback, even though they have Gardner Minshew ready to go. I still believe in if they draft a rookie, Minshew will start in week 1. He understands the playbook. He's been a viable career backup, and I still think he's slightly above league average replacement level. But this is not a regime change. Chris Ballard kept his job. This is just a head coaching change. I don't know if Ballard gets into that war room and says, I can afford to draft a rookie quarterback who's only going to start 8 games or half a season. That may actually make him lose his job. So I don't know if Ballard's interested in a quarterback, to be honest, at least with this high of capital. So I'm not there. I still lean edge and cornerback over a quarterback here at number 4 overall, but curious to get y'all's thoughts on it.
Yeah, Scott, I'll kick it to you. What are your thoughts on, you can talk about 3 as well with Christian Gonzalez, or any thoughts that you have in terms of who's trading up to 3, who the viable candidates are, and then the Will Anderson 4 thing.
I think a lot of what happens at 3 is going to play out within the next couple of weeks. I think the Cardinals right now are kind of content with sitting back. I've heard they've been in talks with about 6 teams as far as moving up to that 3 spot. But until we get a little bit of clarity on this Bryce Young, CJ Stroud situation, the Cardinals are kind of in flux as far as what the actual value for that pick is. That value goes up much more if it's CJ Stroud that drops down to 3. So I think you can kind of see the Cardinals holding up a little bit. But even as far as going to the Colts, I think if Stroud were to drop, I think the Colts are a team to move up. I don't think that Ballard's in as solid a footing as what a lot of other people may think. I mean, he has failed at putting a quarterback on this team. Phillip Rivers didn't work out, and then we went to Wentz. Luckily, they were able to find a dumber team in Washington to be able to take Wentz off their hands and actually get some sort of return for what they gave up. And then we had Matt Ryan, and Now we're on to Gardner Minshew. Like this team has enough pieces to contend for that division and be in the playoffs. So just simply laying down and rolling with Gardner Minshew and Nick Foles as like the other two quarterbacks on this team, I don't think makes a whole lot of sense for a team that can vie for the playoffs in that division. I think when you start looking at it, I think he's going to have to make a move, whether that's Will Levis or somebody. I think the failure with the veteran quarterbacks are going to dictate that they have to go another route and get a younger quarterback.
Yeah, Daigle brought up a good point about like, would a rookie quarterback save Ballard's job? And because I think that's the most important like driving factor here is like they kept him on. Obviously, he made he has some decision making ability here. Is still on this team. Like if they draft Will Levis, is that going to save his job? I'm not sure that's the answer, but I think that if he shows enough flashes, maybe it can extend it for one more year. Whereas if they draft Will Anderson and Gardner Minshew, like they're definitely not good enough to keep Chris Ballard's job. So like, I think that either way, he's probably fired. But like, I think that in his line of thinking, it's probably going to be Levis. And I think that because, there's just been, some little rumors that, he's one of their top guys on their board that I was hearing. So, I think that's probably why I lean that way. And at 3, Daniel Jeremiah mentioned on one of his previous podcasts here in the last couple of days, said that he expects the Cardinals to trade the pick within the next like week or two, I guess like a week before the draft, and just kind of have it be done with and like just not pay attention to it that much. That being said, obviously the young Stroud stuff and the Texans not taking quarterback, like Scott mentioned, would potentially change the value. But he said that like they need to just get it done with and like be more prepared for the draft, because he said it just makes it really difficult to prepare for the draft if you're like thinking about trading and then like reassigning your board, all that stuff. He said it's just like logistically much more challenging compared to like just trading it before. So he said, he thinks he's going to get it done early, which I think would open up the draft a lot more, especially if we get some clarity at the top.
Yeah, and I would put the over-under on that trade happening. Look for it to happen within 24 to 48 hours after you see C.J. Stroud visit with Carolina. I tend to think that Carolina has their pick already, that they're going through, these last little motions to have both of these guys there, kind of compare their meetings. And even Will Levis is his meeting is on the same day as C.J. Stroud. So I would expect that Cardinals pick to be moved within 24 to 48 hours after you see Carolina meet with the last two quarterbacks.
Seahawks are interesting because they are in a position where they have a short-term answer at quarterback. Geno Smith played terrific football for 80% of the year last year, signed I think both the player and team-friendly contract in terms of a long-term answer there. They are in a spot where there's a lot of concern in that division with, the 49ers have questions at quarterback. The Rams roster is really devoid of talent. It's a winnable division. The Cardinals are going to be playing the majority or at least half the year without Kyler Murray. And even so, it's, definitely a team that's not contending. Seahawks have 2 picks. This is a luxury pick essentially because this belongs to the Broncos from the Russell Wilson trade. They can address the position. And there are, smart people out there that will tell you, hey, you don't get a lot of shots in the top 5 to address the quarterback position long-term. And you should probably take a shot, especially when you have another top 20 pick. But you can also say, hey, we're really close. We can add 2 really impactful starters and make a move, considering that they hit an absolute home run in last year's draft, being able to add multiple long-term starters to the offensive line. They had some home runs in the secondary on the defensive side as well. Really, really good draft for the Seahawks. Here, Daigle has Anthony Richardson going there. Again, the ability to, people would probably say out of the 3 or out of the 4 quarterbacks, probably the one that's maybe least ready to start on day one. And no pressure to do so here with Seattle, though it is a team that's been open to say, hey, quarterback competition, any position, we're going to let you compete. And if you're the best guy, you're going to be the guy to go. Daigle, let you talk about the Anthony Richardson to 5 here.
To that point, just remember in 2012, this team gave Matt Flynn a 3-year, $19 million contract, which doesn't seem like much nowadays, but a decade ago was a ton of money and the most on the quarterback market at that time. Then drafted a little kid who was 5'8", named Russell Wilson in the 3rd round, and Pete Carroll, John Schneider, both came out the same in the front office today and said, this is a quarterback competition, and no one believed that. They just gave Flynn $19 million. Why would it ever be a quarterback competition? And Wilson beat him out outright, and they started the 3rd round rookie. they structured Geno Smith's deal, and it's so obvious, to be a 1-year bumper, a 1-year bridge, understanding that he turns 33 in October. And as amazing of a story as he was last year, one of the best in the league, in my opinion, and being a dark horse MVP candidate that first half of the season, he was also Geno Smith's career over the next 8 games. 7 interceptions, 4 fumbles, turnover machine, still ended up leading the league in completion rate, but a totally different player. And the team did deal with a lot of injuries in that time, to his defense, but a totally different player, honestly, that second half of the season, even throwing under pressure. Geno Smith's not the long-term answer here, and the way they structured his contract and being able to save roughly $14 million next offseason by cutting or trading him suggests that they know that as well. You can get the bridge player from Geno Smith at number 5. You cannot get the bridge player Geno Smith will eventually hand the torch to at number 20. So addressing that need here at number 5, especially after the Seahawks are knowingly doing all the work for all the top 4 quarterbacks, I think it's very clear that they are very interested in the quarterback market, assuming one of the big 3 or 4, depending how you view Will Levis, falls to them. And Anthony Richardson makes so much sense to this team, knowing that they can grab edge and address pass rush at number 20.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific point, and it's I think something that we've seen a little bit more and more. So people plugged into the Seahawks have been, kind of on that, and that is a spot that makes a lot of sense. And again, you don't get up here a lot, Connor. Any thoughts on Anthony Richardson, his landing spot in Seattle, taking quarterback?
No, it makes a ton of sense. A guy who's been really plugged in with the Seahawks over the last few years, Rob Statton, mentioned specifically that he thought that Richardson would be a good fit. Brought up a lot of the points that you guys did, but specifically liked Richardson's fit in Seattle over Will Levis or anyone else. Also has gone on the record saying that they not take Jalen Carter 99.5%. And I do want to mention that worries me a little bit because I don't want to get Connor Hughes again. And I think that that's kind of an issue that last year, Connor Hughes, a Jets beat reporter who, again, was generally pretty good. Like, we didn't have any issues with him, had gone on the line multiple times, said they're not going to take Sauce Gardner. Obviously, they took Sauce Gardner, and the national reporters were like Daniel Jeremiah. Other people were saying that they were going to take him. So obviously, it's a big win for the national reporters and a massive L for Connor Hughes, who I think I have muted on Twitter at this point after, him costing me a couple of dollars. But at this point, I kind of worry that it's almost the same thing here because, other national guys have been like, they could take Carter. They've taken risks in the past, things of that sort. But Statton is like, 99.5% that they're not going to take him. So, I think in this instance, in Daigle's mock, certainly I think they would pick Richardson over Carter. But in other instances, that's something that I'm kind of wavering on a little bit more that I wasn't previously. Because, again, I don't want to get, cucked by one local beat reporter when the rest of the national reporters had it right.
Yeah. Scott, any thoughts on Richardson? Again, the other positions that they could go, and Daigle has that. They've addressed the edge with this pick at 20, and we'll get to that. But, that does feel like a glaring need. They did add, Draymond Jones in, free agency from the Broncos, solidify, a little bit of talent in the defensive front, but they've lost a couple of people in free agency as well. So it's not like Carter doesn't fit a need. What are your thoughts on the Richardson play?
Yeah, I think Richardson's definitely here in play. I like having the bridge of Geno Smith there, and for what it's worth, Geno Smith's actually been said that they think he would be a great mentor to any of the rookie quarterbacks should they land there in Seattle. I agree with Connor. I don't take Jalen Carter out of the mix here, and I think specifically when I'm looking at Seattle, Anthony Richardson, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and Jalen Carter. Their pick, it's going to be one of those 4 guys. I don't see anybody else. They've said, I've heard some wrinkles that they do kind of like Christian Gonzalez a little bit with his size and speed, but with the success they had last year in the draft with cornerback, I don't see them as a major need. I definitely think defensive line and edge rusher is I think they could take 3 of them and be fine within this draft. So I think they're going to be looking to address some things along that defensive line. But, Anthony Richardson's that guy that if he doesn't go and, couple of these teams at the beginning, where does he start to fall? Is it Detroit? Is it, I don't know if he falls past this top 5 or 6 range. Where is it going to end?
I compare the Seahawks to being the poor man's Eagles in that they aren't as luxurious, not as top heavy as Philadelphia, but honestly, they don't have many holes to fill. Like they may be getting by with a pass rush, for instance, finished 14th in pressure rate created last year with a bunch of no names, but clearly they need an edge. Having said that, if their big board falls to them at 5 and 20 and they don't leave with an edge, that's okay too. Like they'll get by and find someone in the second and third round, especially with 5 picks in the first 83. So yeah, I honestly think the Seahawks, like the Eagles, are just tough to pin down because they have 3 positions they could draft, don't necessarily have to, but could draft to get more stable. And so then, like the Ravens as well, we're really just trying to figure out their big board and not really like who they're going to take for need. We just need to know what their board looks like and who the highest players are on there.
Yeah, I apropos of nothing, I just want to put it out there. If I'm drafting a quarterback here in this draft and I have the one, I'm taking Anthony Richardson. I feel like that kid is has home run potential. You know, Connor's laughing at me. I think he is a project for sure. Again, it has nothing to do with mock drafts, draft betting at all. The kid I think just has what we're seeing that is really successful at the next level. And I don't think Stroud or Young have that ability to force teams to play 11-on-11 football. And Anthony Richardson's a project, but man, he is special when he breaks pocket. He's special when he tucks and runs. If he can figure out a little bit of anything, if we can get 80% Josh Allen out of there and he becomes a little bit of a semblance of anything in terms of a pocket passer, he's going to be probably a pretty special talent. So it looks like we have, stop me if I'm wrong, 6 and 7 are flip-flopped here on the screen. We should have Devin Witherspoon going 6 to Detroit, Tyree Wilson 7 to the Raiders. Is that correct, Daigle?
Prior to the Jeff Okudah trade, I had Tyree Wilson at 6,
Gotcha.
Devin Witherspoon at 7. The moment that trade happened, because as I mentioned in the article, remember the Lions addressed secondary during the offseason. $29.5 million guaranteed alone sunk into 3 secondary players, including Emmanuel Mosley and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, both who were expecting to start. And so I just thought picking a cornerback here prior to the Okudah trade was incorrect by a lot of mocks. I didn't like it at all. But the moment Okudah was traded, okay, now we have a lot of room for a long-term player, thus assuming Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez, whomever falls here. That's where I think the Lions now go at 6.
My pushback there is Mosley's a 1-year deal. The Okudah thing, even if he stayed there, was coming up on his 5th-year option. They need to get an answer. Sure. You know, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's playing, you know, maybe a little bit of slot, but he's mostly a safety. Like they have long-term answers that need to be addressed at corner. And the other thing with the Detroit thing, like, and I'll kick this to you, Connor, and get your thoughts. We talked about it a lot. Like, yeah, could they add another edge rusher? Yeah, it makes sense. They added 3 last year. I continue to talk about this. They like all 3. Aiden Hutchinson, Josh Pascal, and then I think Justin Houston a little bit later, who had a great end of the season. I just don't see an edge rusher to the Lions. What are your thoughts on the Lions-Raiders dynamic here in 6 and 7?
Yeah, at this point, I think it is the Lions are going to pick a corner. I mean, if one of Gonzalez or Witherspoon's on the board, they're going to pick one of them. We've talked about it on this show multiple times. I think Witherspoon's the better fit, just given he plays a lot of man. You know, he's got that dog in him, as you mentioned. You know, something like he, loves to practice hard. And I think that was actually kind of the beef with Okudah and, Dan Campbell is like they just didn't like his attitude, didn't like how he practiced. I mean, they benched him for part of the season. Like it was just not a good fit there for Okudah, who, I mean, frankly, just wasn't very good towards the back half of the season. So I think that they're gonna draft a corner, but that's not novel. I mean, they're like minus 250 to draft a corner at this point. So I think that that's pretty much in pen, I would say, honestly. Other than that, it's 7 though. I don't know. The Raiders, like I feel like they could draft an edge. I feel like they could draft, an offensive lineman. I've been hearing some rumblings about Paris Johnson Jr. potentially being linked to them as like a potential target. I don't know. I just go back and forth with this team. They're a team that I'm a little bit lost on. I don't know, Scott, if you have any thoughts on the Raiders there at 7, because I feel like they could just go like them and the Falcons, honestly. Well, I guess not the Falcons. We'll get the Falcons in a bit. They could go a variety of ways.
Yeah. So in my last mock draft, I had Tyree Wilson there, which is kind of the same play here. I think the Raiders are in a position where they could just take the best player available. Their defense has been the problem over the last few years more than it was Derek Carr. So I think, any number of players from Christian Gonzalez, Tyree Wilson, Devin Witherspoon. I tend to think they go defense, but I have heard rumblings as far as like offensive line. It's just, is this the spot for Paris Johnson or one of these guys to go? I tend to edge a little bit more towards defense.
And I'll explain Noonan quickly that for Chandler Jones in a match for Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson, Chandler Jones' dead cap hit. You can't get rid of it this year, $25.6 million, but he does have a 2-year void in his contract for next year, dropping that cap hit to $7.2 million. So very easily you can shed him. So they do have, in my opinion, long-term needs here at edge.
Yeah, and outside of Nate Hobbs, they don't have anyone at corner. They can definitely have some needs, the offensive line. So I do think it is one of those three positions, though it doesn't really help. Again, this is kind of why this top 10 is still pretty dicey. We had been on the same kind of note in terms of what we expect the Falcons to do or what they could do, because they have, I think, a plethora of needs. Daigle comes in line, towing the company line very proudly here. Bijan Robinson, 8 to the Falcons, that I think is in line with all three of us in terms of our recent mocks, or at least our thoughts there, at least where we have some money sprinkled down for sure. I'd feel really good about it. Daigle, talk to me about why you have some conviction here on Bijan going 8 to the Falcons.
Their rookie quarterback, who they seem very adamant on starting this year, is not expected to make more than $1.7 million under the next 3 years of his rookie deal for the next 3 seasons at any point in any year. And so then you ask, what do you do? Like, how do you hide this player who they may have confidence in, but we know we don't have confidence in? You continue to build around your league best, in my opinion, rushing attack. Only the Cowboys averaged more running back carries per game than the Falcons last year, and they did that with scrubs and Caleb Huntley and other players they grabbed from behind Tyler Algier and Cordarrelle Patterson. So now you can get the best running back prospect that's since Saquon Barkley and add him to this attack after fortifying your offensive line. Like Caleb McGarry, in terms of run blocking, ESPN's run block win rate only ranked Trent Williams higher. Like this offensive line, especially the left side, is ready to go and ready to grind. And now you add Bijan to the mix. It just makes too much sense, and it's the perfect fit. So I would say I won't back off this for the next 3 weeks. I'm almost 100% sure this is the pick.
I love that. Love that conviction. Connor, I didn't want to speak for you. I forget what your latest mock. Did you have Bijan? I know you have some money down there that would make you very happy with this pick, but what are your thoughts on Daigle's really strong conviction there?
Yeah, so we put it in the extra NFL bets channel in our subscriber Discord. So that we put it at 34-1 on the Falcons draft a running back first,
Hell yeah.
which is now down to like 10-1. So if you guys aren't in the Discord, definitely would recommend hopping in there, because even though we couldn't play it officially, because obviously it's like an off-market book,
it disappeared so quickly.
Yeah, I mean it was gone pretty quick, but still, like there's a bunch of subs are still on it. So as long as a couple of people can make some money on it, you were trying to drop that stuff in there. I did not have him at 8 in my last mock, but I think I will. I guess my only, slight hesitation would be like, it's like, I like with some of these picks that I have like exact team player pairings to have some kind of information behind. And right now I don't really have any of that. I mean, maybe you guys do, but like for me, it makes perfect sense. Everything you guys said. It's just like, I would love to have some kind of confirmation of like, oh, the Falcons really like this guy, or the Falcons are open to addressing the position, something like that. This is not something I've really heard yet, but I do agree though. Like, I do think that this would be a perfect fit.
I was looking for the quotes, because there was a quote either came out of Indy during the combine or something that with Arthur Smith talking about wanting to, we love what we got out of Tyler Algier last year, 5th round pick. Fantastic. You just don't necessarily are married to a 5th round pick for long term. And again, I know it's a position that's been devalued in terms of spending assets to solidify the spot, but they talked about like, we would love to have, someone else support him in the role. And to Daigle's point, they did that last year, with some kind of jabronis, and they still were massively efficient. So you start to add a guy who is really dynamic in the passing game, especially comparatively to what we saw from Tyler Algier last year. And I think that's the appeal of Bijan and why you'll still see him as maybe one of the last of the Mohicans in terms of running backs inside the first round. We just don't see it very much anymore, but he is so dynamic in terms of how you can use him in the passing game that is able to support a young, probably fairly limited quarterback, to Daigle's point. So yeah, I'm with Daigle in the confidence on Bijan at 8. So we talked about the Jalen Carter thing last week. His agents come out and said, hey, if you're not in the top 10, we are not going to visit you. It's not arrogant. We know that teams can trade up into the top 10, we just have promises from teams inside the top 10 that if our guy there is there, he is going to be selected. It makes a lot of sense for the Bears, who have massive holes along the defensive line, who have done nothing in free agency to address the position, really need to address it here through the draft. And Jalen Carter feels like a really good spot for the Bears. We got down on that last week. Jalen Carter was, we talked about in the show live, 6-1 to be drafted by the Bears at number 9. There's talks about the Bears trading down again or all sorts of different stuff. I think if Johnson doesn't go 9, Daigle, I think, another team you talked about, the Eagles, are in a luxury position where they can address it as well. They need a long-term answer to Fletcher Cox. Javon Hargrave took his talent to the West Coast and is in San Francisco. They have a need too. So I do think that Carter doesn't make it past 9 or 10.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Talk to me about those 2 picks.
Oh, the Eagles are in, as we mentioned earlier, just take the best player available. And I would imagine Jalen Carter having to still address interior defensive line and find a long-term presence for Brandon Graham, since they did lose other defensive ends this offseason, a lot of them actually. Then Jalen Carter is not a chance to make it past 10. And Bears fans, I would say, even agree that they don't have a pushback on Jalen Carter. The only thing they ever say is, like, will he fall to 9? Because that's a dream. And I think that's really the question we're asking. Does Jalen Carter get to 9? Because if so, I think it's just the easiest click ever to assume that the Bears would take him over any offensive lineman. I don't know how Getsy and Poles view the way to build their offensive line, but like my own hand in the dirt football analysis would be that you have to do it differently than building other offensive lines around the league, because you have Justin Fields, who was not only second in being under pressure last year, but historically, that's who Justin Fields was, even in Ohio State, because like Deshaun Watson, his greatest strength in extending plays is also his weakness in that he extends plays and puts himself under pressure far too long. This is why Joe Burrow is consistently top 5 in being under pressure in the entire league, because he holds onto the ball for far too long to let plays develop. And so if you're going to do that, even a small signing like Nate Davis, who's going to start at right guard for the Bears, to build your line like that makes much more sense, because Nate Davis is an elite athlete, a smaller player who can get upfield and block in the second level. Like, if there were 5 Penei Sewells in every draft, then sure, draft offensive lineman, no big deal. But Penei Sewell is mentioned because he's Penei Sewell. He is Jonathan Ogden, who's also a monster athlete. Those only come around every 5 years. Like, that's a Hall of Fame left tackle the moment he declared for the NFL draft. And so I think the Bears, and this is just my opinion, no one's telling me anything, but I think the Bears should be looking at building offensive line differently and waiting and instead valuing later super athletes, even if they're smaller, in the later rounds. Thus, with this pick, Jalen Carter makes too much sense to at least plug up their run defense, since the moment they traded Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn from week 9 on last year, it wasn't just they were the worst rush defense in the league. They were the worst rush defense in the league from miles apart. Also led the entire league in EPA per play allowed from that point forward over the second half of the season. So yes, just a very clear need that makes sense if Carter drops to 9.
Yeah, it'd be a massive mistake, in my opinion, Connor, for the Bears to let him go.
Yeah, I mean, so right now the odds are like 3-1 on Bears to draft Jalen Carter. I mean, you're basically saying, like, I mean, is there a 3-1 chance that he makes it there? And I think that actually it's still fine. Like, I think that, like, that's kind of how I feel at this point, that I don't think they pick an offensive lineman, but if they do want to, I think it's worth noting. So there was like a Bears series that was just aired. It was like a 10-minute documentary, and they flashed some things like what they focus on for each position on the board that we screenshotted. So for offensive linemen, their 3 factors was pass pro ability, length, and then foot quickness. And so we had talked about this on the show before. Skoronski, not a guy with length. You know, they already kind of addressed guard. Apparently, they're going to play Tevin Jenkins at guard again this year. That's what some of the local Bears beats are saying. And they already signed Nate Davis. So I think, like, Skoronski is probably, like, off their board. I mean, we've already talked about this before, but, like, I don't think, I mean, unless they traded down to, like, 15, 16, and maybe he was there, like, I think that's a possibility. But in my opinion, at this point, the Bears are probably looking at, you know, Tyree Wilson, Carter, because Tyree's not going to make it to 9, but Tyree Wilson, Carter at 9, or a trade down and hope for a guy like Darnell Wright, who we've heard that they're really high on, or maybe, you know, one of the other offensive linemen falls. That's kind of where I'm at on the Bears at 9.
Scott, you're talking about the Darnell Wright thing in terms of he's kind of been a prospect that looks like he's moving up, and his Bears kind of feel like a spot that, you know, if they were to address the position, maybe it's a coin toss between Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright based on their board and some of the stuff that we're hearing.
Yeah, when I was looking at a lot of the Bears information, we talked about where's Jalen Carter's floor, and basically this is it at 9 and 10. I think those two teams, Chicago and Philadelphia, make sense as teams that could have given Jalen Carter a guarantee that he will be picked in the top 10. But as we start seeing, Darnell Wright's a name that is moving up. I tend to, I talked about Paris Johnson being, a fit there because he's got the relationship with Fields. He also blew away his pro day, but Darnell Wright's the name, and even Mel Kiper, I think in his most recent, mocked Darnell Wright to Chicago, and it seemed like it was a little bit too high for a guy that projects as a right tackle only. You just plug and play right tackle. But a lot of people are looking back at his film and what he did against Will Anderson and some of the other pass rushes in the SEC, and he dominated at that right tackle spot. So I think people are, instead of some of these other guys like Paris Johnson, who some teams do project as a guard as well, and Broderick Jones, who's also super raw, and then we just talked about Skoronski possibly being off of their board, which he's a name that has been mocked to Chicago a lot that I haven't been able to link. But when you start looking at offensive line instead of Jalen Carter, Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright have both had visits with Chicago. So I think those are going to be the other two players that if you start looking at it and Jalen Carter doesn't make it to 9, I think it's going to be one of those two guys.
And he began getting steamed because of his pro day. Like, they saw him piece together a 97th percentile speed score at 6'5", 333. And so I agree with Scott. I don't have him in this mock. Like, I pushed Darnell Wright to number 13 overall to the Jets, and I thought that was high. But genuinely, if you can find markets out there for the first tackle taken, Darnell Wright's an amazing pick because I do think there's a great chance he is the first offensive lineman off the board.
Yeah, love that. Let me see where we're at with that as we so we still have that. We still have that market.
Since we have a group of, obviously, Paris Johnson, Darnell Wright, Peter Skoronski, who is still pretty small to play tackle. I do wonder if he's going to be moved to guard immediately when drafted, and Broderick Jones. Those are the guys we're all trying to sift through, kind of the Tristan Wirfs, Andrew Thomas class a couple years ago, where they're all great selections. They're all the big 4 tackles in this draft. But yeah, we still have to decipher the thresholds that all the teams prefer with them. And Darnell Wright's elite athleticism is starting to pop following his pro day.
Connor, you got that Darnell Wright number first?
12 to 1 in multiple stops. And then 9 to 1, I think, is the worst number out there. So yeah, definitely, I think worth a little sprinkle there. And I was thinking about this too with Paris Johnson versus Skoronski. Like, the more that I think about it, like, that's a matchup right now. So you can get Paris Johnson minus 145 to be drafted before Skoronski. You can get Paris Johnson's over-under is 10.5. I mean, I like Paris Johnson both those. I think he has an out at 10 with the Eagles, an out potentially at 9 with the Bears if Carter doesn't fall there. 7, again, we talked about that before. I think that he's been linked to the Raiders. So, I mean, I would probably rather play the matchup at minus 140 against Skoronski, but it seems like there are like 3. I mean, even the Falcons, if for some reason they don't want to go with Bijan, are all different options potentially for him to go. Whereas Skoronski, outside of a couple early mocks, I haven't really seen much buzz to him, to any of those teams, or even Levin, I think, is in play with Tennessee to take an offensive lineman. So there just seems like so many more outs for a guy like Paris Johnson than Skoronski. So we don't have enough outs to officially play that. Again, we can't release a solo DK matchup where, half people are getting down like $10. But, if you live near a DraftKings, you're able to get it down. I think it's a worthwhile play.
And with Skoronski being 6'4", 313, compared to these other 3 massive guys I discussed, all you have to do is look at team needs. Like, the Eagles don't need a center. They need Lane Johnson's long-term replacement, since Johnson is basically just on a 1-year deal with Philadelphia, and it's never agreed if he's going to return the following season. I believe he returned only this year because they fell short, and that had to hurt to get right there and then miss out on the Super Bowl. So no guarantee he's back next year. They already need to replace left tackle moving forward. And any of the other 3 guys outside of Skoronski, assuming they also notice his size and moving him on the interior, they just stand out so much more. The Titans did release Ben Jones, but I think Skoronski, everyone's still viewing him as a guard, and thus you look more to left tackle in replacing that position for the Titans than you would with Skoronski moving on the inside. So again, we don't include the Titans in this mix. And then, yes, Connor McGovern for the Jets, I don't think is a long-term answer, nor do I think they believe that. But again, that's center. We're not talking about the Jets guard because they're pretty solid at guard. They still need tackle position because everyone, including Mekhi Becton, that they're rotating in on the edges right now are not, in my opinion, long-term answers. So they are also looking at tackle. So just looking at that alone, then even dropping to like the Packers, I squeeze Skoronski in there. But really, if they are looking for Bakhtiari's replacement long-term, maybe Skoronski doesn't fit there either. So really, I would argue there's just no fit on the interior for him in the top 15.
In the sake of not doing a 2-hour show, or you guys can tell me that we could do a 2-hour show, because this is what we tend to do, because we are, and I hope that you as the listener or viewer gets a feel for it. We are very passionate about this stuff, both in terms of how this actually plays out in real football, and also making sure that we're set up to deliver in terms of draft bets. We are 54 minutes in, and we've made it through 10 picks. So we're going to go a little bit off the board and mix it up here to get us to somewhat close to the hour mark, which is, I think, our soft unintended goal. We'll bounce around, kick some questions to you guys. You guys let me know if there's anything that jumped out on Daigle's mock that you want to talk about, anything that you want to talk about in terms of things that we're hearing in the first round. I'll get it started, Daigle, with the Patriots with Zay Flowers at 14. Patriots have a long history of not nailing first round wide receivers. Zay Flowers, a local kid that they've probably been able to see a lot, though let's not pretend that these teams don't fly all over the place, and that just because you can drive down to Chestnut Hill to watch Zay Flowers, that you would see him more than you would see Quentin Johnston. Doesn't make a ton of sense, but we did hear from Brett Coleman, who is tied in and plugged into the NFL, saying that Zay Flowers to the Patriots is the worst kept secret out there right now. First time I had heard of it, and I feel pretty plugged in. What are your thoughts on Zay Flowers? Are you hearing anything else there? And again, obviously it's a need at the position.
And for those listening to this now, if you go to the Most Accurate podcast feed in your playlist, I asked Field Yates about this question on the latest fantasy pod as I spoke with him about draft rumors. So it's available. He talks about Zay Flowers as well. But in my opinion, the Patriots have only done two things historically, and that is get their guy if he's there when it falls to them, or trade back. That's the only two things Belichick knows how to do in this draft. And bringing Zay Flowers in, and not only bringing him in, because most time players are brought in for drills, all reports suggest that it wasn't just drills. Like Bill O'Brien actually sat down with a playbook for Zay Flowers and had him go through it and was teaching it to him. I do think this is the one player they're locked in on. And honestly, I think there are only 3 wide receivers guaranteed to be picked in the first round. And it is Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, and Zay Flowers. I have Quentin Johnston here, but even that I'm not hard believing. I just think the Giants could go two directions in receiver or tackle. And so when I look, I do think Zay Flowers will be overvalued by the Patriots. Not even talking about player analysis, just understanding they could probably get him later on. But I think this is their guy, with all reports suggested, and this is where they go, despite the fact that others have Addison ranked higher as a prospect.
Yeah, I think Brett Coleman went as far to say as it's the worst kept secret in the league that the Patriots want Zay Flowers. Apparently everyone.
You're not even listening to me?
Yeah.
Damn it, Connor.
Yeah, I mean that's just crazy. That's wild. Yeah, I guess sometimes I space you out here and there.
That's fair.
Sometimes you go to Wrigleyville with Silva until midnight. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still a little rough. Not gonna lie, it was a rough morning.
Scott, what jumps out to you in terms of anything here in this, say 12 to 20 range on Daigle's board? I know you've been plugged into some stuff around, Washington, around Joey Porter, but is there anything else? I'll let you, have the ability to jump wherever you like.
Yeah, I'm going to go to 12, and we talked about it last week. The player that I would move up to most in my draft board is Jackson Smith-Njigba. And the more I have listened to the guys that are tuned in, Michael Lombardi, you go listen to Steve Smith. Those guys at Underdog had Steve Smith on breaking down the wide receivers and whatnot. And look, we talked about Bijan there at 8 to Atlanta, but Jackson Smith-Njigba is another player that they have been digging in on here recently. And, we talk about Heineke and Desmond Ridder and surrounding them with weapons. If they can go ahead and put together a run, the running offense that they have with the guys that they have, it might make sense to go ahead and add a Jackson Smith-Njigba to Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So he's a guy that they've been kind of sniffing around on, and they've had meetings with him. And I think 8 would kind of be his ceiling there. I do like the fit there at 12 as well, but I think he's a guy we really need to start keeping track on over these next week or two.
If they draft Jackson Smith and Jigba. Oh my God. I mean, it would be the biggest misuse of receiving weapons of all time. I mean, they'll have like a legitimate, pass catching group with London and Pitts and Jigba and pass the ball 20 times a game. So, I mean, that would blow my mind, Scott. I know that it's very possible and that maybe there's just a massive disconnect between like GM and like coaching, but still, I think that'd be wild.
Yeah, that was a mess last year. One of the favorite bets on the board for us for a handful of weeks there was just hammering whatever under we could get on Marcus Mariota's passing attempts. Then there was a week that the books didn't even post it because, he's basically, they were just lowering it 25, 22, 20, and he's just throwing, dropping back 17 times a game, which is just absolutely wild. We don't see very much anymore. Yeah, Connor, I'll kick it to you. Anything that's jumping out here to you in like the high teens or 20 area on Daigle's mock?
Honestly, I think the one that I kind of was keyed in here was the Chargers at 21 with Jordan Addison. I thought was interesting. Daigle, I'm curious about that one because initially I had the Chargers taking a wide receiver in a mock, but then they've kind of retained, like Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. I kind of think that their one missing piece at this point is speed. And it's not like Addison was slow necessarily, but, he's not necessarily like I don't know, like someone like stretching the field specifically and opening up the intermediate areas. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I think it's still a need, but I don't know. I'm curious how like dug in you are on the Chargers kind of wide receiver thoughts there. If you've heard anything that I've missed.
Dug in on wide receiver. I'm just connecting the dots to the local kid more than anything. Also, remember, Addison led the FBS in receiving at 18 years old. Last year's usage under Lincoln Riley was arguably criminal. And that's not even surprising. As intelligent of a play caller as Lincoln Riley is, he also criminally underused Marvin Mims, who is now getting steamed up as a second, potentially first-round player as well, whenever Mims had his last year at Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley. So I'm actually not shocked that Addison underperformed under Riley at all. But I think the Chargers see beyond that and understanding that they're changing their offense entirely. Like they still have Justin Herbert under a rookie deal for at least another year. They brought in Kellen Moore, a young offensive minded and quite frankly, genius play caller, creative as well to add to this mix. Keenan Allen also has already requested a trade. So I don't think he gets out of there this year, but next year, absolutely. They'll find a way to move on. And Addison has experience both from that boundary and the slot. So it just makes all the perfect sense that Addison would fit there because although his speed, like over 4.5, 40 time, and doesn't show his like the way he can separate, when you watch the film, like he does get over the top of defenses. So I think that's what they're more inclined to look at rather than just his outright, 3-cone split and 40 speed.
Yeah, what's interesting to me here is that you do have them passing on tight ends, both Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer, which I think is a need too. I do think that there's something to the Jordan Addison thing, and I apologize. I forget where I hear it, so I would love to give credit to the source. But Jordan Addison originally declared at Pitt and played there. The receiver coach from Pitt went to USC. Jordan Addison followed him to USC. That same wide receiver coach is now part of the Chargers coaching organization. So there are some ties there around that connection. And it's believed that that's part of the appeal of him going to USC. Forget where I heard it, forget the name of the coach, but I do think there's a spot where Jordan Addison could make some sense. Next for me, and to Daigle's point, we really can't it's really difficult to put trades in the mock. We really can't do it because, again, like you're guessing two things. You're assuming that there's a trade, and then you're assuming then who actually trades into that position. I don't believe that the Ravens or the Vikings make picks at 22 or 23. They both have, I think, smart analytical front offices, and they both have very, very few draft picks in this draft. Now, again, I could be wrong. I think that, adding the positions here that Daigle put there make a ton of sense. Baltimore is a team that always seems to have a guy fall to them that shouldn't be there. In this instance, I think Lucas Van Ness fits that model, who is, typically going anywhere in, say, like the 9-10 low teens range in terms of a lot of mock drafts. We have some friends that are not really bullish on him as a prospect. But yeah, I mean, that's a spot where, here we are. The Ravens stumble into another great spot. I think that the Vikings taking a quarterback and the Hendon Hooker thing at 23 is just incorrect. I know that they have an issue there long-term that they need to address the position. They just, again, another young, smart front office and, general manager there. It just doesn't seem like they would go ahead again in a spot where they're going to be probably close, if not the favorites to win that division, or at least competitive for a playoff spot, to address that position with a 25-year-old who played in Josh Heupel's offense, which is really hard to extrapolate into the NFL, coming off of an ACL injury. Doesn't seem like a spot that they would do so. And again, only having 5 picks in the draft, I feel like those are both great spots for teams to trade up to. So again, I don't know who comes in there and makes that play, but I just don't think that either the Ravens or the Vikings make those picks.
If the Vikings do not trade out, I am set in stone that it's either cornerback or wide receiver. Who that is among those positions, I don't know, but those are the only 2 positions I will seriously consider for the Vikings. And then Ravens just hard because, as you mentioned, I think they get the best value. Whoever drops, and someone's dropping here. I have an edge to Seattle at 20, for instance. It doesn't have to be Nolan Smith. I have him because they tend to value explosive players. Cornerbacks, they want length. And edge rushers, they just look for explosiveness. And that's what they usually get in later rounds when looking for edge players. But maybe it's someone else outside of Nolan Smith. Miles Murphy is also explosive. So I don't know. But yes, I assume that the Ravens will take the best player available. In this case, mock drafts are pinning Lucas Van Ness in like the top 13 picks with certainty when I think it's really hard to get him there. For this one, I really just tried to fit the players who I think will be drafted on night 1. Like Cam Smith for the Saints at 29, I would say I'm the least confident about, but I do think he's drafted on night 1. And so how do I squeeze him in there? Since the Saints, in my opinion, have 3 or 4 different ways they can go for role players. Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson also make sense to the Saints there. So I just squeezed them in thinking these are the 31 players drafted on night 1. And I do feel confident in that notion, but how I work them out and who I would take out, probably Quentin Johnson would be the first one 2 weeks from now in my updated mock. That's where I stand right now.
So we need to consider this. 4.5 quarterbacks right now. Over under. So this opened like massively juiced towards the under, like minus 300. We're looking at minus 145 on Caesars, minus 155 on DK. If able to find minus 170s, minus 180s out there. I'm pretty close to wanting to pull the trigger on this under 4.5 quarterbacks. I don't know if it's a sweat that I want because I think that a team could take Hendon Hooker, but man, it's just been like 2 guys saying that they love Hendon Hooker. It's been like Mike Tannenbaum and like one other dude saying like, oh, like teams have Hendon Hooker as QB3. I mean, maybe that's true, but like, I mean, there's other people on Schefter's podcast they were talking about today. They said, oh, like I can't talk to any team who really like thinks Hendon Hooker is going to go in the first round. And that's more in line with what I would think based on, my preliminary analysis of the situation and looking at the back half of these teams here. Like we went through it last week, but basically, I mean, the Vikings are the only team in the 20s who would even consider it, I think. Like, so you basically need a trade up. I don't know. I mean, I'm close, guys. Any thoughts here? Like, I mean, should we fire on this? I mean, Daigle, I know that you haven't fired on anything yet, but like any thoughts on this over under 4.5 quarterbacks? Basically just will Hooker be a first round pick? Minus 145 on under 4.5 quarterbacks.
I fired at Stroud 225. That was finally the number I wanted just 48 hours ago. Beyond that, though, yes, I would say all the Hooker stuff are lies. I don't think there's any way you can squeeze them in this top 31. So I completely agree. And the other thing I'm most confident about is maybe I shouldn't even be overconfident about it, but I do think Dalton Kincaid is the number 1 tight end to go. I think he's being valued significantly more than Michael Mayer, regardless of my analysis on who is the better player between the 2.
I like it. I'm with you, Connor, on the under 4.5. My only concern is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here too. I love your opinion, Scott, is I think we only see one-way line movement based off of where that line is right now. I think that probably only goes closer to more Hendon Hooker positive news. And I guess we don't get anything actionable out of that. I'm still in the position where I think it's a no-go, but I don't think that that's going to go back into like the minus 200, I guess is what I'm saying. I think that probably only stays at the 140 area or gets a little bit shorter. What are your thoughts on the Hendon Hooker stuff?
So when I track players, one of the things that I do is I have my own model that tracks all the consensus boards of the big media members, as well as some smaller fringe guys that are been just getting started over the last 4 or 5 years. But Hendon Hooker's spot, his ranking on that big board is 62. When I start mixing in the model with a lot of the other mock drafts that are in there, he's still sitting at 47.6 as far as like, where I expect him to be drafted. That's the range. I definitely look, I beat it up last week. I don't see how any of these teams from 21 on down, make a move. Is the team going to move up for Hendon Hooker from the second round to end that range? And look, I've heard some of these analysts talking about him being a top 15 talent. I just don't see it from a 25-year-old player that played in an offense that is not contingent upon NFL success, who's coming off an ACL injury. Like what GM is going to make that their first round selection? So I just don't see it.
Yeah, there's just so many other difference makers on the board too that, like, I mean, at the end of the first round, like you're forgoing like a starting corner or an edge guy who can come in immediately and make an impact, or a tight end in Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid who can be like a legitimate future starting tight end. Like it's just really hard to see that. And then you match that with like, yeah, of course, like a team like Washington obviously has needs to potentially be there. Like Tampa has needs a quarterback, but like, is it really Hendon Hooker? Is that their guy that they're going to pick at 19? I mean, those teams have so many other needs, and like at 16 to 19, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for him to go there.
Not only that, but in my article, I include who just missed the cut in my first round, at least this first mock. Again, I'll have only one more, Johnny 2 mocks here, the night before the draft for scoring purposes. But we are talking about Emmanuel Forbes, who is getting some first round love, even though he is 130 pounds when wet. So I don't know how serious any GM is taking him. John Michael Schmitz could certainly squeeze into the first round here, especially since him and Osiris Torrance are really the only two interior players you're taking seriously on the offensive line.
Joe Tittman is getting
DJs.
He's getting Daniel Jeremiah love, which I think is something we have to give credence to.
Okay. Darnell Washington, the most athletic tight end out of this entire class, could certainly find his way there. We haven't talked about Will McDonald as an edge who could sneak into the end of the first round. Mazzie Smith, if you're looking for an interior player, and I think the Bills are very much looking into him if they choose to skip on linebacker between Drew Sanders, Jack Campbell, and Trenton Simpson, and then Brian Breesy. Not to mention some others like,
the Northwestern guy.
Yeah. So sure, there are a ton of players here, and they all, I would think, take priority over Hendon Hooker.
I want you to take the Northwestern kid's name for a ride. We've all tried it. I want you to take it out for a spin.
No. I don't want to. I didn't look up the pronunciation before I got on the show, so I try to avoid those names. What we all really need as a team is DK or a sports book to release Hendon Hooker 31.5 over under. That's what we need.
FanDuel, please jump into that.
Give us 31.5, just one time, God.
What's that, Scott?
Let me give it for third week in a row. Adetomiwa Adebawari.
Oh, that was good. Either way, you said it quickly, and that the confidence in coming quickly is all that matters. As long as there's no dramatic pause in any syllables there. I mentioned last week, if I were to change anything from my previous mock, now would be finding a home earlier for Myles Murphy. Daigle has him in a similar spot where I did. Sure. I think Myles Murphy is an ascending talent, just again tested through the roof, was perceived to be a top 10 prospect early in the process, and then slipped down a little bit. And I think the tape wasn't great for a few of those defensive linemen for Clemson. And then Anton Harrison's a guy that I want another. Give me a Anton Harrison yes no first round. Absolutely smashing yes. Again, the kid do play 3 years at left tackle and a pass-friendly offense in Oklahoma. I think is a plug-and-play, guy who maybe needs to work a little bit more on the dog in him in terms of being able to be a run blocker. But if you could just put him into an offense like, the Bengals have a need along the offensive line, or put him in a Chiefs somewhere we're going to have pretty heavy pass rate over expectation type of offense. I think Anton Harrison comes in and solidifies one of those tackle positions on day one. So like how both of those guys are included in Daigle's mock as well.
Also, Osiris Torrance, first round. We talked about all these tackles and they are amazing, but to be arguably the most elite run blocking player of this draft, I think that has to take precedence, especially when you're 6'5", 330, jacked up with speed, with SEC experience. has to be a first round player. So whether it's the Bucks, who I have him here, or the Giants, I certainly think he's in the first round.
Yeah. The one that's interesting to me too, and I'll kick it to you, Connor, and anything else that you have before we go, the Brian Branch stuff. Like Brian Branch, a great prospect. People thought he was going to be good. Did not test well. Kind of small, not really fast. Again, pretty good tape. Played at Alabama. Obviously the pedigree is nice. Scott had him at 16 to the Commanders. Daigle has him here at 24 to the Jags. I didn't have him in mind, but he was probably one of those really tough to leave off. Thoughts on Branch? Do we have any information? Because I heard this talked about again. We don't really know what he's being considered in terms of his position, because that impacts safety in the first round market. That impacts corners in the first round market. Any thoughts on Branch or any information on that?
Yeah, I got to say, I will not be taking the safety over under, ride again this year after last season where Lewis Seen and the other safety were the last two
Dax
selections. Yeah, Dax Hill, and I had to sweat what they were being called on stage. I do think that sports books usually outline the rules. Like they usually go off of NFL.com listings. So I don't know what he's listed at NFL.com, whether it'll be or safety. But yeah, I will not be taking that ride again because that was horrible.
But I do think Noonan.
Yeah, so yeah, we're not doing it again.
The way the league is going, though, I think Brian Branch kind of has to be a first-round player, honestly, because now every team continues to take on this Ajero Avero 3-safety approach and mold their defenses that way because yards per carry are going up as more teams play 3 safeties in order to prevent big plays as Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes only continue to get better and in secondary. So I think 3 safeties continues to be a priority for defenses moving forward since it's a copycat league.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I mean, I definitely, if I would have made a mock in, late February, he definitely would have been in it. Obviously the testing didn't go well for him. So that kind of backed it off for me a little bit, but yeah, I don't hate the spot going to Jacksonville here either. It's just a team that isn't in another position where they can really go a handful of ways in terms of luxury picks.
And Branch won't play on the boundary, but you look at Jacksonville's secondary. If Branch is there, it just makes too much sense. Like they're still depending on Tyson Campbell to develop and be their number 1 corner, and he's a Urban Meyer carryover. Like Doug Peterson didn't even draft him. So I think they have many secondary needs, including a versatile safety who majority played in the slot last year with Alabama.
Yeah, I think I have them taking Deonte Banks, who have going a pick ahead of them to Minnesota. Yep. So yeah, I think that position makes a ton of sense.
One of the many spots that genuinely could just shift like due to the player. Like it's not even the position that I got wrong. It could just be the player I got wrong because there's so many bundled up, edges included.
Yeah, Scott did the homework here for us, listed as a cornerback there on NFL.com. So that should probably be our answer. I don't think we're going to get a safety round 1 market because there's really no one else even sniffing the first round in terms of the safety position. It's a very weak position this draft. So good stuff. Anyone else in closing got anything? Good stuff. Head over to go ahead.
Cowboys, I would imagine, go offense as well. Bijan, if he's there, I'm not expecting him to be there. Certainly would be the first pick. Jerry Jones would absolutely run to the counter to throw that name, but I don't think he'll be there. Thus, some people, someone on Twitter messaged me and called it lazy that I pinpointed a tight end to Dallas. That's information and news. Like I came up in the Dallas media. That's not laziness. That's just, I know what this team is targeting, especially if Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid are there. So I think it's very clear after having no capital, who I think they're good players in Jake Ferguson or Peyton Hendershot, they're also not priorities here. I think it's very clear that they're looking at tight end in the first round.
Love it. All right. Again, head over to 4for4.com. You can find Daigle's mock there. Again, you can find the previous mocks from Scott, Connor, and myself as well. And take advantage. Again, no house advantage. Go to the App Store, download the app, deposit $5. You can deposit more. Deposit $100. I don't care, but you can do it for $5. Use promo code 4for4bets, and you can get access to a betting subscription for 3 months. Again, $150 value. You'll get an email about 48 hours after depositing. Be patient. Then you'll get access and learn how to access your subscription with us at 4for4. So good stuff as always. We'll continue to ramp this up. We'll figure out what that looks like here as we get closer to draft day. Again, 2 weeks out. So appreciate everyone hanging out. Again, likes, rate, reviews, share the show. We appreciate it. And we'll be back next week. Thanks, everyone.